I need a prenuptial agreement, Lauren. I won't risk everything I've built on a maybe. My fiancé said those words over a candlelit dinner at his parents' estate, with his mother nodding approvingly beside him and his father swirling bourbon like a judge delivering a verdict. I smiled, set down my fork, and told them all that I thought it was a wonderful idea. What none of them knew, what my fiancé had never once thought to ask in 2 years of dating, was that the woman sitting quietly at that table had already built and sold a software company for $14 million. The look on his family's attorney's face when my financial disclosure hit the conference table is something I will carry with me for the rest of my life. My name is Lauren Hale, and I am 38 years old. On the paper that most people in my life ever bothered to look at, I am a mid-level marketing consultant who works from home, drives a 7-year-old Subaru with a cracked rearview mirror, and gets her groceries delivered because she is too busy to go to the store. I own 2 pairs of running shoes. I buy my coffee at home. My apartment is clean, comfortable, and aggressively unremarkable. What most people do not know is that at 31, I created and sold TrackBridge, an inventory and supply chain analytics platform used by regional hospitals and logistics companies across the southeastern United States. The acquisition closed quietly. I negotiated carefully. And then I took the money, moved it into a structure of investments my financial advisor had spent 3 years building with me, and went right back to looking exactly like I always had. Not because I was ashamed. Not because I was hiding from anything. But because of what happened to my aunt when I was 17. My Aunt Claire was the first person in our family who ever had real money. She built a catering company from a folding table in her garage into a regional enterprise with 12 full-time employees. She was brilliant and funny, and she loved a man named Dennis who drove a nice truck and coached Little League and seemed, for all the world, like someone who loved her back. They married when she was 34. He knew about the business. He knew the numbers. He knew exactly what he was walking into. When they divorced 7 years later, Dennis's attorneys knew those numbers too. He had never once contributed to the business. He had, however, contributed to the marriage, and in the state where they lived, that was enough. The settlement took 4 years and cost my aunt nearly a third of what she had built. She told me once, sitting on her back porch with a glass of sweet tea she was too tired to finish, that the worst part was not the money. The worst part was realizing he had always been counting. I was 17. I filed that lesson away somewhere deep. I met my fiancé at a charity gala 2 years ago. He was an architect, genuinely talented, I believed then and believe now, with his own firm, a reputation in our city for high-end residential design, and a confidence that filled a room without seeming to try. He was handsome in a deliberate way, the kind of man who had learned exactly how to enter spaces and make people glad he was there. He asked me what I did. I said marketing consulting. He nodded and moved on, which I noted and appreciated. We talked for an hour about hiking trails and terrible action movies and whether Chicago deep dish counted as pizza or as a casserole, and by the end of the night I had given him my number. He never asked about money. Not on the first date, not on the 10th. He knew I worked from home and assumed, I think, that I made a comfortable but unremarkable living. He drove us to dinner in his BMW. He chose the restaurants. He picked up checks with a kind of practiced ease that told me he wanted to be the one who provided, and I let him because it made him happy and because nothing he was spending was anything I needed from him. I was not being deceptive. I was simply not correcting an assumption he had made and never thought to question. For 2 years it worked. We were good together in the ways that mattered. We laughed easily. We handled conflict without cruelty. We wanted the same things from a Sunday morning. When he proposed in the kitchen of my apartment, making pancakes in his socks at 9 in the morning, I said yes before he finished the sentence. The shift started at his parents' house. His mother had opinions. That is the gentlest way I can put it. She was a woman who had grown up with very little and had organized her entire adult identity around the fact that her husband had provided well and her son had done even better. She tracked status the way some people track weather, constantly, anxiously, with great attention to small changes. She was not unkind to me, but she watched me the way you watch a door you are not sure is locked. The dinners began to include comments. Subtle ones at first. It must be nice to work from home, so flexible. Richard works so hard, you'll really be able to support him in that. Once, when I mentioned a consulting project that had run longer than expected, she said, "Well, it's lucky you have Richard to lean on." I smiled and said nothing, and she took my silence as agreement. 3 months before the wedding, my fiancé and I had dinner with his parents. After the meal, his father excused himself to his study and his mother disappeared to the kitchen, and my fiancé reached across the table, took my hand, and said it. Lauren, I've been thinking. My firm is at a real growth point right now. I have investors considering a significant expansion, and I think it makes sense for us to protect what we've each built. A prenup. Something simple and fair. I looked at him for a long moment. Something simple and fair. I repeated. Exactly. Just common sense, right? Everybody does it now. His mother reappeared in the doorway at that exact moment, holding a plate of cookies she absolutely did not need to be holding, with the expression of a woman who had been waiting for a cue. It's just smart planning, she said warmly. Richard has worked so hard. You understand. I looked at my fiancé. Then at his mother. Then back at my fiancé. Of course, I said. I think that's a great idea. His mother smiled. My fiancé exhaled in a way that made clear he had been holding that breath for longer than just dinner. He squeezed my hand. You're amazing. You know that? You never make anything into a drama. I drove home alone that night because I had told them I had an early call in the morning. I sat in my parked car in front of my building for 20 minutes, not moving, listening to the engine tick as it cooled. I kept coming back to one phrase. What we've each built. He had said it like we were equals on a balance sheet he had already reviewed. He had no idea. He had never once asked. I called my attorney the next morning. Her name is Patricia Wu, and she has handled every significant legal matter in my professional life for the past 6 years. She is meticulous and relentless, and she has a voice like a woman who has heard everything twice and is no longer surprised by any of it. I told her everything. The dinner. His mother in the doorway. The phrase something simple and fair. When I finished, she was quiet for exactly 3 seconds. He's been planning this, she said. This wasn't a conversation. It was a notification. I know. And he has no idea. None. Lauren. And I could hear the controlled delight in her voice, the professional version of it, the version she kept on a very short leash. Here is what we are going to do. Patricia drafted a response that was, on its surface, completely cooperative. Separate premarital assets remain separate. Clean division on anything acquired jointly. Reasonable spousal support limitations. All the language his attorney would recognize as standard and uncontroversial. But embedded at the center of it, worded in precise legal English that sounded like routine due diligence, was a single requirement. Full bilateral financial disclosure. Both parties. Every account, every asset, every investment vehicle, every business interest, every source of income exceeding $5,000 annually. Verified and documented. He'll sign it without blinking, Patricia told me. His attorney will tell him it's standard. He'll think he's being thorough. And then we show him what thorough actually looks like. The week before the meeting, I lived in 2 worlds simultaneously. In one, I texted my fiancé about florists and argued affectionately about whether his college roommate needed a +1. In the other, I spent 4 evenings with Patricia going through 6 years of financial documents, organizing everything into a disclosure package that was 31 pages long and referenced 3 separate LLCs, 2 real estate holdings, a brokerage portfolio, and the structured payout from my acquisition that was still generating residual licensing income. Patricia called it the most satisfying document she had ever prepared. His attorney's name was Gordon Marsh. He worked out of a downtown firm with a lobby that was designed to make you feel small before you sat down. My fiancé had been using him for 2 years to handle contracts for his architecture firm. He was, from everything I could observe, a competent and self-satisfied man who charged a great deal of money to make other competent and self-satisfied men feel protected. We met on a Tuesday at 11 in the morning. My fiancé was already there when I arrived, standing near the window in his best suit, which I recognized because he had worn it the day he signed his biggest client. He kissed me on the cheek. Ready to get this done? Absolutely, I said. Patricia arrived 2 minutes after me, carrying a slim leather portfolio and wearing the expression she reserved for proceedings she had already won. Gordon Marsh presented my fiancé's financial disclosure first. The architecture firm, valued at just under $1 million on paper, though Patricia had noted privately that the valuation was optimistic. His savings and investment accounts, totaling around $200,000. The BMW, leased. His condo, Mortgaged to 80%. He had done well. He was comfortable. He was, by most measures, a successful man in his late 30s with a growing business and a solid financial foundation. He sat across from me looking like a man who had rehearsed this moment and was pleased with his performance. Gordon slid the prenuptial agreement across the table. Straightforward terms, he said. Protecting what each party brought to the marriage. Nothing unusual. Patricia let him finish. Then she opened her portfolio. My client has reviewed the proposed terms and finds them largely agreeable, she said, in the tone of someone narrating a nature documentary. However, per the bilateral disclosure clause in our counterproposal, we will now be presenting Miss Hale's financial documentation. Gordon frowned slightly. We've already provided. You provided Mr. Calloway's disclosure, Patricia said pleasantly. We haven't yet seen Miss Hale's. My fiancé turned to me with a small, confused smile. Lauren, you don't have to. I want to, I said quietly. You asked for transparency. I think that's the right instinct. Patricia placed the portfolio on the table and slid it toward Gordon. I watched Gordon Marsh open it. I watched his eyes move across the first page. I watched him go very still. He turned to the second page. His jaw shifted slightly. He went to the third page, and I saw him blink twice in rapid succession, which was, I would later learn from Patricia, the most emotion she had ever seen him display in a professional setting. My fiancé leaned over. He picked up the summary sheet. I know the exact moment it registered because his hand stopped moving entirely, suspended in the air with the paper in it, and the color left his face so completely and so quickly that Gordon quietly reached toward the water pitcher. What is this? My fiancé's voice came out like something torn. My financial disclosure, I said. Everything you asked for. Patricia spoke in the same measured tone she had used all morning. Miss Hale is the founder and former CEO of TrackBridge Analytics, acquired 4 years ago for $14 million. She retains ongoing licensing income from the platform, currently generating $41,000 per month. She holds 3 real estate properties. Stop. My fiancé set the paper down. His hands were flat on the table. Just stop. The room was completely silent except for the ventilation system overhead. He looked at me. Not with anger, exactly. With something rawer than anger. With the expression of a man who had been certain he understood the shape of his own life and had just discovered he had been holding the map upside down. You've had this whole time. Yes. You let me pay for everything. You let me, he stopped. Started again. You drive that car. You live in that apartment. I like my apartment. Lauren. His voice broke on my name. Why didn't you tell me? I had thought about how to answer this question for a long time. I had practiced it with Patricia and with my sister and alone in my kitchen at 2 a.m. Because I needed to know if you loved me, I said. Not the account balance. Me. He stared at me for a long time. Then he looked away, out the window, at the city spread below us. When he looked back, something had rearranged itself in his expression. The raw shock had receded, and something more familiar had moved in behind it. Something calculated. Okay, he said slowly. Okay. This is a lot to process. Gordon quietly gathered his papers. But here is the thing. My fiancé sat forward, and I recognized the posture. It was the posture he used in client meetings when he was about to present a solution. This doesn't have to change anything. It doesn't have to be complicated. We just need to think about how we handle this publicly. Patricia tilted her head by approximately 2 degrees. Publicly. My clients. My investors. My family. He was speaking faster now, the words coming out organized and practiced in a way that told me he had not arrived at this position in the last 5 minutes. If word gets out that my wife is worth significantly more than I am, that changes how people see my firm. It changes how they see me. There are deals in progress right now that could be affected. I looked at him. I said nothing. It's just optics. It's just I'm not asking you to hide it forever. I'm asking you to be discreet. We keep the financial details private. We present as partners building together, which is true, by the way. We just don't specify who brought what. You want me to sign an NDA, I said. About my own finances. About our finances, collectively, yes. For the benefit of both of us. Gordon, Patricia said, very calmly. Do you want to advise your client at this juncture, or shall we continue? Gordon Marsh pinched the bridge of his nose. Lauren. My fiancé reached across the table toward my hands, but I had already moved them to my lap. I love you, that hasn't changed. I want to marry you, but you have to understand what you're asking me to absorb here. You've been sitting on $14 million for 2 years while you've been what? I asked quietly. He stopped. While you've been paying for dinners you chose? While you've been driving a car you leased to impress clients? While you've been performing success for an audience you were afraid to disappoint? I heard my own voice and was slightly surprised by how steady it was. You weren't supporting me. I never needed to be supported. You were performing a role, and now you're upset because the audience knew more than you did. His jaw tightened. I'm not doing this. I stood. Patricia was already closing her portfolio. I'm not signing an agreement that legally binds me to hide who I am so you can feel like the most impressive person in the room. I'm not apologizing for what I built. And I'm not spending the rest of my life pretending to be smaller than I am because it makes you more comfortable. You're being dramatic. His voice had gone cold. You're throwing away everything we have over your pride. My pride, I said. Right. I picked up my bag. Patricia was already at the door. Lauren. The cold had cracked, and underneath it was something desperate. Think about what you're doing. You're 38 years old. You're not going to. Goodbye, I said. Not cruelly. Not with satisfaction. Just as a fact. We walked out. The elevator doors closed. Patricia looked at me, and for the first time since I had known her, she put her hand briefly on my arm. You okay? I don't know yet, I said honestly. I was not okay, for a while. That is the part that the story should not skip over, because it was real and it was long and it did not resolve neatly. I went home to my apartment and I sat on my couch and I cried in a way I had not cried since I was much younger, the kind of crying that is not about one thing but about all the things at once. I cried for the man I thought I had known. I cried for the Sunday mornings in his kitchen. I cried because the proposal had been real. His socks on my kitchen floor had been real, and now I could not be certain what had been real and what had been a performance, and the uncertainty was worse than a clear answer would have been. My sister came over without being asked, which is the thing about sisters. She brought Indian food and sat with me while I ate almost none of it, and she did not try to make it better with words, which was exactly right. The calls started the next morning. My fiancé had, apparently, spent the previous evening on his phone. The story he was telling people was streamlined and effective. I had concealed significant assets throughout our relationship, had deliberately withheld the truth, and had ambushed him in a legal proceeding with information I had been strategically hiding. He presented himself as the victim of a calculated deception. He was persuasive. He had practice. Some people believed him immediately. His mother left me a voicemail that I listened to once and deleted. 2 of our mutual friends sent carefully worded texts asking if I was all right while making clear they had already formed an opinion about who was not. His business partner, a man I had cooked dinner for twice, called to tell me that what I had done was cruel, and that my fiancé was a good man who did not deserve to be humiliated. I let most of it go unanswered. Not because I had nothing to say, but because I understood that some narratives only collapse under their own weight, and the best thing I could do was refuse to prop them up with my energy. The collapse came faster than I expected. People began asking questions that the story could not answer. If he was the victim of deception, why had he required a prenuptial agreement in the first place? If he had been blindsided, why had he arrived at the signing with a document his attorney had been preparing for weeks? If the issue was trust, why was his response to discovering her wealth a demand for legal silence rather than a conversation? I heard the questions secondhand, through my sister, through Patricia, through a colleague of mine who moved in overlapping social circles. I heard them in fragments. Gradually, like watching a photograph develop, I could see the fuller picture of how the story was landing on people who did not have a stake in believing either version. One afternoon, 3 weeks after the signing, I was working at a coffee shop near my apartment when I heard 2 women at the next table discussing it. They did not know who I was. One of them had heard a version of the story through a mutual acquaintance of my ex-fiancé. So she had all this money and didn't tell him, she said. Her friend considered this. But he demanded a prenup because he was worried about protecting his assets from her, right? And then got upset when it turned out she had more. The first woman paused. When you say it that way, it sounds completely different. Her friend laughed. That's because it is. I did not say anything. I drank my coffee and kept my eyes on my screen and felt something loosen in my chest that had been pulled tight for weeks. His business began to suffer in the ways that happen when a professional's personal chaos becomes visible. Investors who had been interested went quiet. Clients asked pointed questions. His partner sent him a message that Patricia heard about through a colleague suggesting that the narrative he was managing publicly was, in fact, managing him. His attorney, Gordon Marsh, sent me a brief, professional note that surprised me more than almost anything else in that period. He wrote that in 25 years of family law, he had rarely seen a client so thoroughly misread his own position, and that he wished me well going forward. I read it 3 times. It did not fix anything, but it did feel like a small door closing properly. I started seeing a therapist that spring. Her name was Dr. Anita Powell, and she had a way of sitting in silence that did not feel like waiting but like thinking alongside you. In our 3rd session, she asked me something that has stayed with me. When you hid your finances, she said, were you protecting yourself, or were you creating a test? I wanted to say it was only protection, but I had been honest with myself for long enough by then to know it was both. I had hidden who I was to keep predators away, but I had also, somewhere underneath that, wanted to see if someone would love me without the proof. And when my fiancé had failed that test spectacularly, conclusively, I had felt vindicated and empty at the same time. And I had needed someone to help me understand why vindication felt so hollow. Because you didn't want to be right, Dr. Powell said very gently. You wanted to be wrong about him. I cried at that, and it was a different kind of crying than before. Cleaner. That fall, my sister dragged me to a fundraiser for the public library system. I had resisted on the grounds of general emotional exhaustion, but she is 6 years older than me and has been overriding my objections since we were children, and she had already told the organizers I was coming. The event was held in a school gymnasium that had been optimistically decorated and smelled like industrial cleaning solution and fresh-baked goods. There were folding tables and name tags and a silent auction featuring gift baskets and paintings made by students. I was assigned to help sort donated books with a small group of volunteers. One of them was a man named James. He was about my age, maybe a year or 2 older, with the slightly distracted energy of someone whose mind is usually solving a different problem than the one in front of him. He was wearing a flannel shirt with a small paint stain on the cuff and glasses that had been repaired with tape on one hinge in a way that suggested he was aware of the tape but had simply not gotten around to replacing them. He taught 8th grade science at the middle school 2 blocks from the library. He had been volunteering here for 4 years. He organized the books by putting them in the wrong categories, explaining his own system as he went, which was not the correct system but had an internal logic that was somewhat compelling. We talked for 2 hours. About his students, about a unit on soil science that he was inexplicably passionate about a hiking trail I mentioned that he had done twice and had specific opinions about. He asked what I did, and I said tech consulting. And he said that sounds like you're explaining something to people who don't want to understand it, which was not wrong, and we both laughed. At the end of the evening he asked if I wanted to get coffee sometime. Not as a scheme, he said. Just because you're good to talk to and I don't have enough people in my life who argue correctly about hiking trails. I gave him my number. Coffee became dinner, became a Saturday afternoon at a farmer's market, became a drive to the hiking trail in question, during which he was entirely correct about the 3rd mile and I told him so. And he handled being right with the self-satisfaction of a man who had been waiting to say I told you so for some time. On our 4th date, we were sitting on the small deck of his apartment, which was aggressively ordinary in the best possible way, second-hand furniture and too many books and a collection of houseplants that were doing their best, and I told him everything. I told him about Trackbridge and the acquisition and the structure of what I had built since. I told him about my Aunt Claire and what I had watched happen to her. I told him about my ex-fiancé and the prenup and Gordon Marsh and the disclosure package that was 31 pages long. I told him about the NDA request. I told him about the months of trying to figure out what was real. James listened. He did not interrupt. He did not rearrange his posture to signal anything. He just listened, with the full attention of someone for whom listening is a skill, not a performance. When I finished, he was quiet for a moment. Okay, he said. 2 things. I waited. First, your ex-fiancé is a deeply insecure person who confused his self-worth with his net worth, and everything that happened is entirely consistent with that and not at all about you. He said it the way he probably explained scientific principles to 13-year-olds matter of fact. kind, slightly impatient with the part of the problem that should already be obvious. And second? He smiled. Second, I make $54,000 a year. I drive a 2009 Civic and I have approximately $12,000 in savings, which I am mentioning because I want there to be no ambiguity whatsoever about why I like you. Which is because you're sharp and you're funny and you argued with me about trail difficulty for 45 minutes and you were mostly right and I've been looking forward to seeing you every day for the past month. I looked at him for a long moment. That's it? I said. That's it. I laughed. It was not the complicated aching laugh of the coffee shop or the nervous laugh of the first months with my ex-fiancé. It was just a laugh, uncomplicated and whole, the kind that comes when something turns out to be simpler than you feared. We are getting married in the spring. There is no prenuptial agreement, though Patricia has suggested one on principle and I have told her I will think about it, which we both know is not a yes. There is no NDA, no condition, no document designed to manage what I am or scale down how much space I take up in the world. James met my business partners at a dinner last month and spent the entire evening asking them questions about supply chain software with the exact same genuine curiosity he brings to soil science. His students, when he told them he was engaged, asked if she was cool, and he said very, and they seemed satisfied. I still drive my Subaru. The rearview mirror is still cracked. James has offered to get it fixed 3 times and I have told him I am attached to it, which is not entirely a joke. Looking back now, I understand something I could not have articulated 2 years ago. The secrecy was never the problem. The secrecy was a symptom of a question I did not know how to ask directly. Does someone see me, actually see me, or are they seeing the shape of what I might offer them? My ex-fiancé answered that question with his own behavior, not with mine. The prenuptial agreement was his way of saying that he had been calculating the whole time. The NDA request was his confirmation. What James offered, and what I had honestly stopped believing existed, was something much less complicated than a calculation. He was just interested in me. In the actual, specific, real me, the woman who drives a cracked Subaru and has opinions about hiking trails and built something from nothing and is still always more than the number that came out of it. The love I almost settled for was held together with clauses and conditions and the constant management of each other's perceptions. The love I have now is just 2 people who find each other interesting and want to keep finding that out. That is the only prenup that ever mattered. If this story stayed with you, hit the like button right now. It helps more people find this channel. And I want to know, what was the moment in this story that got you? Leave it in the comments below. Subscribe and turn on the bell so you never miss a story from the Concealed Bonds.